Welcome to Madlik. My name is Jeffrey Stern, and at Madlik we like to light a spark or shed some light on a Jewish text or tradition. Today I'm excited to bring you a live recording of Madlik Disruptive Torah on Clubhouse every Friday at 4 p.m. This week, I have a spirited discussion with Rabbi Adam Mintz on the Bible's first commandment to mankind, that it is not good to be alone. And we explore how this commandment relates to gender definition and gender preferences. So throw away your preconceptions, invite a friend, and listen to Thou Shalt Not Lie Alone. This week's portion is Kedoshim, which is just an amazing, beautiful, I think, rendering of what the Torah is about, as good, if not better, than the Ten Commandments. It covers pretty much everything from ritual to social to being pure and holy. It's really worth reading. There's a part of it that we actually listen to every Yom Kippur, and that relates to all sorts of sexual deviations and different forbidden acts of relating to eros and sex. And I wanted to use that as an excuse to explore the individual. Because if anything relates to the individual, it's gender identity, it's gender relationships. And I think before we get into the nitty-gritty, it just seems to me that coming out of the isolation of COVID, we are all so much more sensitized to what it means to be alone, to what it means to be lonely. I think a case can be made that those communities that have had the toughest time with COVID have been communities that having social interaction is key for them. Possibly they're communities that have many people living under one roof and are crowded. You can probably figure out already, I'm talking in one community is the Acharei community, the ultra-Orthodox community. And there's a community that truly understands the challenge of being isolated. Last week, Henry brought up Steisel, the popular series on Netflix. And those of us who know the ultra-Orthodox community were not surprised when old man Steisel lost his wife. He got married within a few months. Henry and I both know a principal of a school in Connecticut who lost his wife. He was in his 80s and he got remarried. That community marries off their children very young. They understand, and I think I give them credit for this, the power of companionship, the power of relationships. So I want to take the experience that we've all had for the last year through COVID to look at how we should all look upon individual identity and the ability and freedom of individuals to have the relationships that they want, and as importantly, the relationships that they need. So before we get into the nitty-gritty, Rabbi, I just want any insight that you might have in that regard at any level.
So what do we want to think about specifically this week as kind of a continuation? You talked about kind of a series. What do we want to focus on this week? And then I'll tell you what I think.
Okay. Well, what I was trying to say is I want to focus on the individual person and how we view the individual person in terms of relationships, permitted relationships, given the fact that we've all come out of isolation ourselves, that we've all experienced what it is to be unable to be with the ones we love in many regards. So
Jeffrey, in terms of the individual, and I think we're kind of taking it this week from the communal to the individual, from the synagogue to the individual. So you made reference to the beginning of the Torah reading, which is famous because it's what we all hear on Yom Kippur morning. The word that is actually, you always look in Torah readings for the key word. And the key word in that Torah reading is the word kippur, the word to atone. Obviously, the word Yom Kippur is the Day of Atonement. And, that, Jeffrey, is one of the most difficult words that we have. What in the world does the word atonement mean? I want to atone for a sin. You hear criminals sometimes say, I want to atone for a sin. What does that mean? So it's interesting that the Bible scholars suggest that the word kippur, atone, as the Torah uses it, actually has a sense of rubbing clean. That it's actually a physical thing, that you want to rub out all of the bad and you want to start fresh. And I think that's an interesting idea, and I think that's, Jeffrey, what a lot of people are talking about now. Are we talking about rubbing clean, starting from scratch? Or are we talking about keeping what we have, learning from what we did, and kind of moving forward? That idea, what does it mean to rub it clean, to start from scratch? Is that something that we want to do or something that we don't want to do?
I love it. I think that at many different levels, what I'm inviting us to do today is to rub it clean and start afresh, throw out every preconception that we might have, and look at it in a fresh way in terms of how important is relationships and what does it trump and what does it not. So I'm going to start by picking the one verse that I think of when I hear a question about is this relationship permitted or not? And that is the verse after man is created that God said, "Lo tov hiot adam levado." So after man is created, and of course, and we'll get a little bit into it, there are two chapters in Genesis. The first, it says that he was created male and female, he created him. And then the second one has the more famous rendering, a narrative of Adam and Eve, so forth and so on. But in any case, God says it's not good for man to be alone. And levad, boded, that is the core. And by the way, you could make a case that this is the first prohibition in the Bible. This is the first time during creation that God does not say it is good. He says it's not good. It's not good for man to be alone. And I first heard that when I was listening to a rabbi explain how we have to find a way to permit or to accept relationships that don't fit the square peg into the round hole type of thing. And he says, if God creates somebody with certain coding, it's God's creation, so we have to respect that. So I kind of start from there and invite us all to look cleanly at this situation and to start from a position of we should be, our highest concern is that people should not be alone. People should not be isolated. And I think even on that base level, we are more sensitized today after COVID when there's a kind of an equalizer and we've not been able to see our families and our loved ones, that we can understand the pain and suffering that causes. But I want to raise the stakes a little bit. And what I want to add is I actually feel that besides making a very profound gesture of what is the essence of humanity and of concern and simpatico, the Bible and God through the Bible is saying something even more profound. And to understand that, I just have to quote one other verse. The other verse is from Deuteronomy, and it says, Acharei ladat, it is clearly demonstrated to you that the Lord is God. There is none beside him. Ein od milvado. And it uses the same word, and what it's saying is there is only one being in the universe who is alone, and that aloneness is actually his or her power and uniqueness. And no other being, any being who wants to live without a relationship is, in a sense, undermining the uniqueness of the identity of the Godhead. And I want to look at the prohibition and more importantly, the requirement that we are not alone from that aspect. And there are, Rashi even picks up and says under the verse in Genesis, when God says, I'm going to make for man a helpmeet because it's not good that he is alone, Rashi says, I shall make a helpmeet for him in order that people may not say that there are two deities, the Holy One, blessed be he, the only one among the celestial beings without a mate, and this one, Adam, the only one among the terrestrial beings without a mate. So I think that this prescription, this admonition, this requirement that man is a social being and needs a relationship is more than just something that is an ethical and social need. It's a theological, metaphysical need that we need to have a relationship. We cannot assume about ourselves or assume about others that we can be unitary. Only God can be unitary. And I want to explore that a little more. Adam, what are your thoughts about that reading of God saying it is not good for man to be alone?
So my question, I couldn't agree with you more. There's no question that God is saying is that people need relationships. What I'm interested in that verse is, though, what's God's role in establishing relationships between human beings? Why is God part of that? Why does God need to say it's no good for human beings to be alone? Human beings should realize that. I think that really, there's a famous Talmudic statement that says that there are three partners in the creation of a human being: your mother, your father, and God. And I wonder whether the relationship with one another is somehow connected to our relationship with God, or maybe to say it more specifically, in our relationship to ourselves. If we want to understand what our relationship is to other people, we have to have a perspective of who we are in the world. Then we can relate to other people.
So what you're saying is that, and I'm going to parse it slightly, that there's the one question of what is God's requirement, responsibility, involvement in making those relationships. But the other part of what you said is that he or she is a part of those relationships. And that, Judaism, and I would guess many religions believe that whether you call it a bashert or someone who is meant to be, that there's this divine and spiritual aspect of the marriage relationship. We have many relationships. No one argues that business partnerships are made in heaven. No one goes to a rabbi to create employment contracts. But somehow, when it comes to that relationship that we are talking about, the primal core relationship of a human's existence, all of a sudden, I would say almost universally, there's a sense of, if you believe that there is a spiritual aspect to life, that spiritual aspect is part of that relationship. In a sense, that's kind of what you're saying. Am I reading you right, Adam?
You're reading me exactly right. That's what I'm throwing out as a possibility.
So, and I'm totally agreeing with you, and I'm saying that it even adds to this fact that the fact that God, at least in our tradition, said it's not good for man to be alone. He didn't just push him out the door. There's this wonderful midrash that says, what does God do since creation is over? And it says that he is mishadech shiduchim. He's making matches, and it goes on to say, kasher lezavek zivugim kriyat yam suf, that it's as hard to make a right match as it is to split the Reed Sea. So again, I think we're both focused on the fact that if you're going to focus on the individual, an individual by him or herself is not good. To be as profound as the biblical verse, not good, lo tov. So I think that, again, to me, it even emphasizes even more how important this prohibition, this admonition is, and how careful we should be when we withhold the right of others to have that relationship. And how careful we should be when we have certain preconceptions. So what I would like to do is continue on my little exploration of what the commentaries say and recent archaeology says about this situation of man being created first unitary and then requiring a mate. And Rashi kind of made the association, but if you go to the Midrash in Bereshit Rabba, it actually says that man was created androgynous. And it's not totally clear whether that meant that they had both genders or was gender neutral. But in any case, the Gemara in Barachot says something slightly different. It says that he was created with two faces, du partsufin. And then if you look at the translation, it says he was created both male and female. But it's almost as if they understood what two faces were. And I have tried to change my image. I don't know if you're seeing my face right now, or is there a new image there? But there was a historical study done of these clay figurines that literally have two heads. And it seemed to have been well known enough that the Gemara mentions it. And the sense was there was a real belief that man aspired to be like God, to be sui generis. And sui generis is a great word because it's not so much that he could not procreate as he didn't need to procreate. That was the real challenge to the Godhead. So it seems to me that with this new archaeological evidence, we really have a much better sense of what really happened here, and that the rejection of the Torah when it says it's not good for man to be alone, it really means it's not good for man to be without relationships. It's not good for humanity to think that they can be sui generis. And that adds a whole other level to the concept that I'm finding here, which is a real requirement that humanity not be lonely, not be isolated, and have relationships, and a real warning flag to any of us who presume to stop an individual from having that relationship. It kind of turns it on its head. It's you focus not on the forbidden relationships, but we'll get to those in a second, and you focus more on every human being needs to have a relationship.
Well, let me just pick up something you said in the last sentence, and that is, it's interesting that this is followed by the forbidden relationships. What do you make of that? It's important to have a relationship, but you can't have an inappropriate relationship, so that everything needs to be balanced just so. I would actually just jump for a minute to the second half of this week, which is Kedoshim. It's interesting you talk about holiness. How do you define holiness? Holiness means to be involved, but holiness also means to be separate. And I think that there's a balance when you talk about relationships. We need relationships, but those relationships need to be the right kind of relationships.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So that's a wonderful segue to the first place where the Bible forbids a relationship, or at least gives a sense of what the wrong relationship is. So if you look at Genesis 2:24, it says, "Therefore, a man should leave his father and mother and cling to his wife, so that they become one flesh." And from this, the Talmud in Sanhedrin learns that even B'nai Noach, who people that did not receive the Torah, are forbidden to have immoral relationships, because it was commanded to Adam and Eve. So what kind of relationships are they? Again, I don't want to become Oedipal, but you have to leave your father and your mother. So that is one forbidden relationship. And the other obvious one is your sister and your brother. Those are all sui generis relationships, because as we say when we talk about a blue blood, the royalty, the tribal hierarchy would say that the people on the top breed amongst themselves. They don't need humanity. They don't need outside integration. It's a kind of a variation on the theme of trying to be like God. And I would argue that that is the most basic thing that's forbidden. And again, what makes it forbidden is it's not a true relationship with another, it's a relationship with oneself. One is simply trying to monopolize the DNA and to create a pure-blooded being.
So again, we're back to the same point, which is that the relationship with other people has to do with our relationship with ourselves. We need to understand our relationship with ourselves if we're going to maximize relationships with others. That's an amazingly important idea, I think.
Yes. I think the core takeaway here is it's not simply enough to say it's not good to be alone because you have nothing to do and you might go batty. It's you need to know that you need a relationship. You need another. You're not a god. We don't believe in royalty and in those that are above society. We all need each other, and you've got to find your other. And as you said before, this is God's will. He's part of it. So it's a spiritually endowed relationship. So based on that, my read of this week's Parsha, when it says, and this is the key verse, and do not lie with a male as one lies with a woman, it is an abhorrence. I take from it a sense I look at that figurine of the male and the female combined, I look at the sense of this sui generis kind of relationship. But that's kind of splitting hairs and trying to find an interpretation. My bigger gut feeling is, what can we do? What is Orthodoxy doing? What is, if we had a conservative or a Reform rabbi here, I would ask the same question. What are we doing in the world that we live in to reinterpret this, or at least to navigate around it, so that we can find a place and acceptance and even potentially an embrace for those who do not meet the strict confines of gender definition, and the relationship is not the male-female relationship that is traditionally sanctioned.
Let me ask you a question on that, Jeffrey, and that is the idea of being judgmental. The Torah seems to be very judgmental in terms of these forbidden relationships, defining what they consider to be an appropriate relationship. Do we find the Torah in other places being judgmental like this about people's behavior, or is that something that's special here?
So the example that I always bring to myself is, I'd like to compare it, and this is going to sound strange to you, but there is a prohibition against taking interest. And you will find it mentioned many more times in the Bible than this single verse that we just had. And it does get very, I would say, very empathetic, very emotional. It does use words that are derogatory. It doesn't simply say, don't do it, it's not right. It uses, and it goes all the way through the prophets. It's a vehement disgust with one person who would take interest on a loan from another person. And nonetheless, because of the needs of society, that is a admonition that we basically have a loophole for, and we get around in the interests of a civil society. So I don't think it's the answer that you expected, but I do think you would admit to me that the vehemence of the Bible in terms of the colorful language used for interest is as strong as this prohibition against, that is taken to mean a prohibition against homosexuality.
I think that's so creative to connect the two, because you're right, you never would think to connect the two, but the language is very similar. Now, the thing is that what the Torah is trying to prevent in its strong language against interest is something very different than what it's trying to prevent in its strong language against homosexuality. Right? One is economy, one is the economics, and one is human, is human sexuality. They're really not the same thing, are they?
I think if your question related to, the way I took your question was kind of disgust. In other words, when do you feel like saying to the Torah, well, tell me what you really think? And I think that with regard to interest and with regard to this relationship here, it doesn't just say a male should not lie with a woman. It says it's an abhorrence. And that kind of language, I do think they have similar. But again, I could make the argument that one relates to your pocketbook and the other relates to something much more profound. So I don't know whether the lack of symmetry works in the favor of finding a loophole for interest, but not finding a loophole for homosexuality or not.
That's a good question. You really raised that by comparing these two laws. You've really raised that in terms of what the view both of the Torah is, and I guess what the rabbinic view is. Where have they allowed for loopholes, and where do they stand, firm? And find a loophole, while in everything else they can find, in selling chametz, they can find a loophole, right?
That is perfect. That is absolutely perfect. I think it gets us to the old adage of where there's a will, there's a way. And I think if I wanted to conclude on that note, I would say that if I want to wipe the slate clean, as you suggest, and look at things with glass eyes today after a year of COVID, I would say let's rededicate ourselves to finding solutions for those relationships that are torturous. Aguna is a perfect example. And I think that the number of rabbinic minds that are working on the Aguna situation, and I'm sure they will find an answer. I mean, there are some of the solutions were already made to the way the marriage contract is written. Professor Lieberman has Kedushin al Tanai. Maybe we can get those same rabbinic minds working on a way so that we can embrace diverse gender relationships. That's all I would suggest, and I think that again, if there's a will, there's a way. And I would invite all of our co-religionists to work together to end this type of suffering, if we can, because at the end of the day, as the good Bible says, it's not good for man to be alone.
Beautiful. Really good. Shabbat Shalom. Thank you so much. And looking forward to this week's parasha and to talking next week again.
Shabbat Shalom. Thank you so much, Rabbi.
Be well. Bye-bye.